maybe the bigger struggle is our students just aren't taught how to think about their own learning. The adults around them think about their learning, but we don't actually teach students how to notice and focus on their own learning.
Neurodivergent learners face unique challenges that traditional teaching methods don't address. But what happens when we rethink learning strategies to empower these students? Today, we're unraveling these challenges with Gretchen Wegner, an expert in redefining study skills for neurodivergent minds. Creator of the AntiBoringLab YouTube channel, Gretchen's going to share ideas on empowering students through innovative strategies. That's straight ahead on episode 207. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
For those of you who are educators, I want to let you know that we are opening up registration for the Neurodiversity University Educator Hub. Along with the great conversations and ideas that we discuss in the Hub itself, you also get access to our monthly live expert webinars. As a matter of fact, we have Christine Fonseca joining us next week, plus all of the past recordings. You can participate in roundtable discussions on specific topics, jump in on office hours with me to talk through neurodiversity-affirming practices, or sign up for a one-on-one hot seat consultation to brainstorm strategies to support your students. Just click the link in the show notes and join us. Registration closes on Friday, January 19th. One last quick note. Tina Glass at the University of Denver is seeking participants for a research study. She's specifically looking for gifted males between the ages of 18 to 29 who have received a psychopathological misdiagnosis sometime in their life. This might be a bipolar diagnosis, depression, oppositional defiant disorder, or other mental health diagnoses. There's a link in the show notes to connect with Tina. Okay, my conversation with Gretchen Wegner is up next.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast,
we describe these autistic behaviors from the outside, what we see these kids doing when they struggle. And we describe that as the definition of autism, that there's these deficits in social ability because we want them to be more social. And there's these deficits in their restrictive repetitive behaviors because we want them to be more flexible. And these are grievances. It's not what autism feels like on the inside. And this is also true in the anxiety community. You're avoiding this. We need you to go to school. We need you to eat these foods because it's difficult on a caregiver or it's difficult on the support people. And that can be a big motivation for people to want to change. But we want people who are entering into therapy to think about what their own goals are and not just be responding to the grievances of their community.
that's episode 199. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Today, I'm talking to Gretchen Wegner. Gretchen is a former educator who now works with students to build their executive functioning and study skills. She is also the creator of the Anti-Boring Approach to Powerful Studying, and you can find her on her YouTube channel, AntiBoringLab. So, Gretchen, thank you for joining me.
So happy to be here.
So we know that most schools were not created with neurodivergent learners in mind.
Really?
Yeah. And we know that for some people with brains that don't fall into that neuronormative standard, some of those tried and true strategies don't always have that same effectiveness. So to start off our conversation today, I'd like to talk about the types of struggles that neurodivergent students have at school and what some of the causes of those difficulties might be.
Yeah. And I knew you were going to ask that, and I made a list, and we could probably just spend the entire time talking about that.
Just reading the list.
Yeah. I mean, one major thing that a lot of people are talking about right now is concerns around being able to self-regulate, right? If something is boring or if bad feelings come up at school or when you're at home trying to do your homework and learn at home, how do you self-regulate? And I think that's especially a difficulty for neurodivergent students. And why is that? I mean, I don't even know if we can't have time to talk about the why that's a problem right now. You know, I was listening to another podcast of yours and around, what was it? Why can't I think of the word now?
Interoception.
Thank you. Interoception. And it's like our environments are just not built to honor feelings and to honor what our bodies are actually experiencing as far as those feelings are concerned. So that's, I think, one of the biggest issues that I am seeing as an academic coach. And I know it's a little weird to talk about feelings when we're talking about studying and learning, but really it's one of the biggest impediments.
I was actually doing a webinar earlier today, and we were talking about how if a child is dealing, for example, with depression or anxiety, and they need to take a break from school, that might be okay because they're probably not learning anyway when they're feeling that way.
Right.
And so that can be extrapolated to neurodivergent students, you know, just for being in some of those environments. It's hard to self-regulate when it wasn't created for your type of brain.
No. And when you're sitting all the time and bodies aren't meant to be sitting, when you're having to wait to deal with movement, to deal with toilet, to deal with play, whatever it is. Anyway, it's miserable, I think, for actually any brain, and then extra miserable for the neurodivergent brain. Another thing is executive function related things, and specifically initiating tasks, sustaining tasks, and then completing tasks, I think are really, really hard to do when you're not in control of the tasks being assigned to you and you're not in control of your schedule. And then you also don't necessarily like them or don't understand why you need to do these things. Those are particularly difficult. So that's another struggle.
Yeah, I think that being able to connect those things to real life is so important. And there are some who can do the busy work and they just know, like, this is the thing I'm supposed to do. I have to do it. And they can self-regulate through that. But if you struggle with that self-regulation and then you're asked to do something that you don't connect with, that you don't see how it connects to your own life, it can be really difficult to get that done.
Yeah. And even if you do see how it connects to your own life, but you still struggle with the actual tasks of initiating, or in my case, as a neurodivergent person, I can initiate just fine, but I can't complete a task to save my life. And it's a problem in my business right now, actually, because I started so many things and now we need to streamline, we need to close. And I see that in some students as well. So just practicing and building the brain habit of beginning something, sustaining it, and then completing it can be a problem in and of itself, even if you care.
So is there another struggle that you have that was on that list?
Oh, I have like 8 more, but let me pick one. Not actually having a big enough toolbox for how to learn. That can go in so many directions. But I think as far as neurodivergent students go, either they assume they need to study in the ways that they see all of the neurotypical students studying, and they try and do that, and they just fail miserably, and then they get a lot of negative feedback. Or, this is the other thing I see as an academic coach, students so excited to be creative, and I get to study in creative ways, and then they just allow their ideas and their creativity to take them to all these fun places, but they're not actually focused on, am I learning the thing that I need to learn? And so maybe the bigger struggle is our students just aren't taught how to think about their own learning. The adults around them think about their learning, but we don't actually teach students how to notice and focus on their own learning.
Yeah, I find that that's really frequently a prevalent problem. And part of it is because there are some kids who kind of just figure it out. It's more automatic for them. And then when we have kids who are struggling, we're like, well, you need to study more. Do they even know what that means? And, I just feel like there are so many students who feel like they're bad at school because the tools that they do have aren't effective for the way that their brains work. But helping to build that self-awareness can be a huge help to improve that learning. How can we help students become more aware of who they are as learners and why that's important?
The first thing we can actually stop doing is we can stop talking about learning styles.
Hear, hear.
Right? When we talk to students about what kind of learner they are, then usually we go into that typing. And a lot of teachers don't talk about it. Or when they do, well, I'm a kinesthetic learner, I'm a visual learner, and so I need blah, blah, blah. And actually learning styles are not, I know I'm preaching to the choir right here with you, but for the listeners out there, if this is new to you, learning styles are not actually proven to exist.
They're a myth.
They're a myth, absolutely. Now, there are learning preferences, and it can be very fun to take learning style tests because they're fun to figure out what type you are. But then you need to know, this is my preference. But if I always learn based on my preference, I'm actually not going to learn very effectively at all. And so I have to learn how to learn in lots of different ways. The thing that I've found to be the most transformative in the students that I've worked with, and then I train educators and academic coaches now, and they've found to be transformative, is simply to tell students how their brains work so that they're not just given a bunch of strategies, but actually they're taught this is what the brain needs to learn. And so you can use that strategy in a brain-friendly way, or you can use it in a brain-unfriendly way. And actually, most students naturally choose the unfriendly method, partially because the adults in their lives also don't really understand the science of learning. And so they're giving them faulty advice if they're getting the advice at all. So focusing on the brain science and the strategy together is the most transformative I've found.
Can you give an example of what you mean by friendly versus unfriendly strategy?
Well, actually, let me just ask, can I ask you a question? Sure. What do you think the most common study strategy is for any student, neurodivergent or not?
Highlighting.
Yeah. Okay. If I just get a lot of color on this page, it'll work. Yes.
Yeah.
Another very common thing that people say is, well, I need to just go back and reread the textbook or reread my notes. And often that's what I see any student doing, but especially the neurodivergent student goes back to rereading and falls asleep or can't focus. Or
Right. Their eyes are moving across the page, but they're thinking of something totally different.
Totally different. Exactly. So those are unfriendly to the brain because I'll give a more complicated explanation, but the simple one is they're boring to the brain. They're not just boring to you. You are literally boring your brain. And it would be nice if all of our teachers taught in ways that were fun, but that's just not going to happen. However, if you understand the science of what your brain needs, you can be in charge of not boring yourself when you're in class listening and then when you are at home doing your homework and studying at home. So the brain-friendly strategies are around what I call, and this is what I teach students, is what I call the study cycle. The study cycle is my attempt to encapsulate everything that I've learned about the neuroscience of learning and also what cognitive psychology teaches us about learning into 3 steps. And so just briefly, I'll say those 3 steps are, first, we got to get exposed to the information for the first time, right? That's step 1. Step 2, and this is the one that all the science shows we have to do in order to learn, is we have to test ourselves to see what we know and what we don't know. And when you're testing yourself, you can't be looking at your notes. When you're highlighting, you're actually not testing yourself. Not that highlighting is bad, but that is what I would call an encoding strategy. That's step 1. That's first exposure to the information you're highlighting. But then you have to quiz yourself to see what do I remember and what don't I remember. And then the stuff that was hard to remember or hard to learn, the 3rd step is that you need to encode it or learn it again, but in a new way, not the same way, not going back to reread and highlighting things again, but actually in a new way. And I find that most students, for step 2, the quizzing yourself step, don't put in the effort to quiz themselves well. They just do rote flashcards, or they hate flashcards and don't do it at all. So that's one issue. The second issue is most students just don't have enough ideas for how would I even learn it in a new and interesting way.
So they keep doing the same thing over and over, even though it's not really working.
And there are several studies that have been done of college students in this case, that the summary of the study is that most students have not actually been taught how to think about studying.
Yeah.
because of that, they just choose random strategies, and the strategies that they are consistently choosing don't work. And again, this is true for neurotypical students, but they can push through. But the neurodivergent ones just have such a hard time pushing through, because if it's not interesting or if it creates bad feelings in my body, I just can't sit still long enough to finish the task.
You know, I think this feeds into my next question for you, which is about executive functioning skills, but I think it correlates with just even the study skills too, because I feel like there can also be a lot of learned helplessness surrounding the ability to develop those skills. So not only does the neurodivergent student feel like, well, I've tried this, it doesn't work, but I think sometimes even their parents or teachers might feel like that progress is difficult to make. And so I'm wondering about your thoughts on whether or not executive functioning skills specifically can be taught.
The answer is yes. And in fact, that's, I think, the only way we get them.
Yeah.
We have to learn how to, like the three things I mentioned, initiating, sustaining, and completing tasks. Those are examples of some executive functions. And I'm a 50-year-old woman who still is trying to teach myself how to complete tasks, right? So it is actually something we have to work. Some of us are just lucky enough that we can just do a bunch of the things easily that we need to do in order to be successful, both in school and then in life. But many of us have to learn how to pay attention to our executive functions. And we can learn this even when we're kiddos, how to notice what's working and what's not working, and then how to kind of hack our skills. And so we literally have to learn executive functions.
We're really talking about integrating metacognition. We need kids to think about, what are you actually doing? Like, rather than just going through the motions, but what are you actually doing? And then how do you determine whether or not it's even working?
Right.
And so helping them be able to reflect on those pieces so that they can build better habits or they can try new things.
Yeah. And how do you not give up too early? That was actually one of the things I didn't mention on my list of problems that neurodivergent students have in school.
Right.
Is too often they'll try something and give up so quickly. It doesn't work. So how do we stick with something long enough? How do we understand how to experiment with our own habits and behaviors so we stick with it long enough to know what will work and what won't work? But then some students also stay with something way too long and do the same thing over and over and over because they don't know what else to do. And so how do we find that nice, happy medium? And you're exactly right. That metacognition and the act of noticing, I draw an infinity loop when I'm talking to educators and students. And on one side of the infinity loop is the skill of noticing. And then on the other side is the skill of taking action. And one of the most important lifelong skills that I think we can instill in students and develop for ourselves as adults is the ability to travel on that infinity loop, to notice what's happening inside our systems and to notice the impact in the rest of the world, to choose an action based on it, and then to notice how did that work or not work, and then just constantly be there with curiosity and compassion to ourselves rather than meanness or judgment or hatred, like I'm trying to fix myself. It's just, oh, nope, this is just what it means to be human, is to notice and take action and notice and take action.
I know that novelty can be a big part of helping to find some of those workarounds when tasks seem boring, or maybe they're feeling mundane or tedious, whatever it might be. And so if we can integrate more playfulness into our work, though, we can really leverage that novelty for success. Can you talk a little bit about how playfulness can be integrated into the tools and strategies that we use?
Yeah. First, I want to say that my use of the word anti-boring is, of course, I mean playfulness and fun. But teenagers respond more to the negative than to the positive. And if I tell them you can play more at school, they're like, no, I can't. There's no way to have fun. It's horrible. But if I say, yeah, okay, you're right. Can't control whether something's fun, but we can control whether it's anti-boring. And I know that you would prefer things to be less boring than they are, right? Right. Yes. Okay. So anyway, I just wanted to name that's why I use that.
You get a little buy-in from them. I have 2 teenagers in the house. They do tend to be rather contrarian.
So contrarian. So just entering with grumpitude. I'm a big, we hear that gratitude, being grateful and making our gratitude lists is wonderful for our mental health. And I agree with that. And I think I have an inner teenager in me too. And I just can't have gratitude until I've been allowed to have my full grumpitude. And so being able to just complain, and that's actually playful.
Yeah.
It's like playing with what doesn't feel good rather than let it being stuck and horrible. We get to voice it, and we get to voice it playfully. And so that's actually a really important way, I think, of working with teenagers. But novelty. So I was just giving a talk at a high school a couple days ago, and I taught them the study cycle, which I just taught you, albeit very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then we unpacked what we had just learned in what I call the formula for how to learn anything, which is blank plus blank plus blank. And the first blank is we need repetition. The study cycle is called a cycle, right? And even that infinity loop that I talked about, we go back and forth over and over. Learning requires that. But that's what's so boring is when we repeat things over and over again. And the brain literally, if your brain's a light bulb, it dims. Mm-hmm. It just can't grasp that much repetition. So the second blank is that we need variation as well in order to learn. And we need both repetition, but also variation, and not constant variation. And some kids I see then just want to create constant variation. So we need to learn how to tell what are the hardest things right now that I'm having a hard time grokking, and then how can I get playful with it? And so one of the other things I did at this talk, I'd never actually done this before, but I grabbed just a bunch of supplies from my house and I held them up at the beginning and I said, I'm going to show you a bunch of things that don't seem like they're study tools, but they are, I promise you. And we'll understand by the end. And like one thing I held up was blue tape. Now, a lot of teenagers don't even know what's special about painter's tape. Mm-hmm. You can tape things to the wall and untape it and it doesn't ruin the paint. But then at the very end of our talk, we talked about, flashcards are boring. But what if, just as an example, you took the flashcards that were the hardest ones for you to learn and you taped them down the hallway that you walk down in your house. And so 3 days before the test, it's your job to stop at least 3 of those and literally test yourself, see if you know it, and then flip it up to see if you knew it. Much more fun to use flashcards, but it's still flashcards. And you're not doing it for every single flashcard. You're only doing it for the things that you're struggling to learn. But you can't even do that until you know how to assess what do I know and what don't I know. So it's this constant toggling between testing yourself and then finding variation for the things that are more of a struggle.
I love that. What are some other ideas to kind of make things anti-boring?
Well, I'm a big fan. I mean, I know this is audio, but you and I are looking at each other. I'm a big fan of these 8.5 by 11 little lap whiteboards. Mm-hmm. And I have like 30 of them around my house. But I think every family ought to have a stack of them with several bottles of whiteboard spray and tissue or something at the dining table or wherever. Because what if you just grabbed a whiteboard? I don't know why it's more fun to write with a dry erase marker than it is on a piece of paper, but it is. And what if, like, even every day, I'm making this up right now, but what if every day as a family before dinner, everyone had a whiteboard in front of them and write down 3 things that you learned today, whether you're at work or at school. Hold them up, show each other. That's a form of testing yourself. And it's more fun. Mm-hmm. And then you can go erase part of it, or, I messed that thing up. So you can literally erase it and then write the correct thing there. So just having these whiteboards on hand for quick little bursts, because testing yourself doesn't have to be long and tedious. It doesn't have to be an hour and a half study session. It can be Mondays is the day I try and write everything I've learned in history on my whiteboard. Tuesdays is the day I try and write everything that I've learned in math and just see what stuck and what didn't stick.
That retrieval practice, I think, is the technical term, right?
You got it.
What do I actually remember? What are the things that I actually have retained in my head? Because you can't do anything with it if it's just kind of this vague, cloudy memory. You have to really be able to retrieve it from your mind as well.
That word retrieval is one that I play with whether to use with students or not. I love teaching students the official brain word. Mm-hmm. So like the word encoding for the first side of the study cycle and then the word retrieval for the second side. Quizzing is a faster.
Yes.
It's a faster communication word for most students.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like kids really kind of buy into this anti-boring approach to learning. What else would you share? Are there other components or information about how this has become your work and how it can help kids?
Yeah, I was a teacher. Then I became an academic coach, got a job at a coaching company. And, I was a fine coach back in the day, but it was really when I went to the conference Learning and the Brain. I don't know if you know that conference, but they have 2 or 3 a year, and they're just wonderful. And it's when I went to that conference and then came back and then just started playing around with not just giving my students strategies anymore, but saying, hey, can I teach you about how the brain likes to learn? And then can we talk about some strategies and then have you practice choosing the strategy and telling me, give me the brain reason why you chose the strategy. And then let's experiment with it for a week and then come back and tell me. So rather than just saying use flashcards or use a whiteboard or whatever, it became, where are you on the study cycle right now? Are you using the whiteboard to retrieve, or are you using the whiteboard to encode something in a new way, or whatever the strategy is? And if a student couldn't explain what their intention was, and then whether it achieved their intention or not, we just spent more time talking about that. And I noticed that in some ways we got less done in sessions, right? There were fewer strategies that got thrown out and practiced, but the ones that did got more fully integrated in a student's daily habits. And they also could then articulate why it worked, which means that they, in the future, were more able to choose strategies, any new strategy, because there are thousands of executive function and study strategies out there. And you can just get on the internet and see a few.
Yeah.
But if you don't know how to assess what's the right strategy for the learning need in the moment, then you're not fully internalizing them in a way that has them be fluent so that you can use them for the rest of your life. So I noticed that's what made the biggest difference.
One of the things I really like doing with my clients at my office is brainstorming and kind of being creative about trying to come up with strategies that might work. But if you don't have that second component of reflection and really assessing whether or not it works, then you're just teaching yourself the unfriendly ways to learn the material as opposed to finding the effective ones.
Right. And it's why I'm actually passionate. This particular year, I'm not working directly with students in one-on-one coaching anymore because I'm working with educators more, because I see that's the faster path to me making change, is helping educators understand, how do you teach the study cycle? I have a 10-minute, what I call mini lecture that I've taught other educators how to deliver to students before they share strategies. Because I would love to see, teachers do give out their pet strategies, study for my test in this way, study for my test in that way. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's bad necessarily, but I would just love to see layered onto it this quick overview of the brain science so students have the capacity to understand why it might work, and then translate those strategies that a teacher taught them into their other classes too, because most students didn't just think, my teacher told me to do this thing, and so either I'm going to do it or I'm going to resist it.
Yeah.
But they're not thoughtful about, I just have been taught something huge that I can use everywhere in my life.
So for parents and educators, can you share maybe one or two just really easy to implement strategies that they can use to help the young people in their lives develop some of these skills?
Yeah. I'll share two. One does require that maybe you go and go to my website at AntiBoringLearningLab.com/library. And there's a way for you to actually watch me teaching the full study cycle mini lecture to students on my library. So that would be an action item to do first. The tip then, once you've done that, is to teach it to the kiddos in your life, whether you're a parent or whether you're some sort of educator, but then to get practiced at asking the question, where are you on the study cycle right now? So rather than the question, have you studied for that test? Did you study? What did you do to study? Let's actually try and stop doing that and instead get students to articulate, where do you need to be?
Mm-hmm.
That also includes, like, if a student, it's like, parents will often say, go talk to your teacher about it. So often students don't know what to say to their teacher. But if they've learned the study cycle, then, for example, they can look at it and go, oh, I need my teacher to help me practice retrieval because I don't even know how to do that. Or, oh, I practiced retrieval and it's this skill that I suck at. And so now I'm going to go into my teacher's office hours and say, can you help me learn this in a new way, this particular thing? So parents asking that question of students, where are you on the study cycle right now, will help them develop that metacognitive muscle over time in terms of thinking about their thinking.
I love that.
I am aware, though, that many people are not going to go watch that video.
That's okay. But I think even having this conversation is helpful for them where they'll have enough.
Yeah.
But it is there. The video is there. So
yeah, it is there. Well, and I'll say quickly that another question, if you're not going to go watch the video, that you can just get practiced at asking, and this is related to the difficulty with initiating, sustaining, or completing tasks, is just what's the next tiniest little action you'd be willing to do right now, even if it's just 30 seconds. What's the next tiny action? And I find that too is a transformative question for students.
So, Gretchen, I'm really grateful that we've had this talk today. But as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you one last closing question. If you were talking to a student who's feeling really overwhelmed and frustrated and helpless about being able to improve their school's success, what would you tell them?
I would first want them to hear, it makes sense you're so frustrated. Schools were actually not built for the kind of lives we lead right now. So you're not the messed up one. Actually, schools and the culture are the messed up ones. So it just makes sense. The fact that you're feeling frustrated shows that you are actually in reality about what's working and what's not working. And I just want to honor and acknowledge those feelings because they're very real and they're very true and they make sense. That would be the first most important thing. And then after that, I would want them to know, if you want to talk about it more, if you want to find out what the next little thing is that you could do. We can't change the schools. We can't change how frustrating it is. But we might be able to find some more you-friendly ways to be in this environment. Would you like to talk about that with me? And then see if they're even open to that conversation.
Gretchen Wegner of the AntiBoringLab YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks. I had so much fun.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Neurodiversity affirming strategies are all about learning to work with your brain instead of against it. Finding the unique tools that help to invigorate learning in neurodivergent brains is vital to finding success, as well as learning how not to get frustrated when the same old doesn't work for us like it does for others. Get creative with ideas, try new things, and know that when something works for a little and then stops working, that isn't a failure. It was a success for as long as it worked, and now you get to try something new. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Just keep on doing what you do, doing what you do, doing what you do, doing what you do, doing what you do. Do what you like, do what you like to do, do what you like, do what you like, do what you like to do.
Thanks to Gretchen Wegner. We appreciate her time. You can find links to her work in the show notes. Also, if you listen on Apple Podcasts/iTunes, we would be eternally grateful if you would write us a review. It really does help others find us, which helps us grow our reach to more neurodivergent people and to those who love and support them. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Doing what you do, doing what you do. Just keep on doing what you do, doing what you do, doing what you do, doing what you do. Do what you like, do what you like to do. Do what you like, do what you like, do what you like to do.
This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.